We are now into that last session of using feedback for strategic impact. And I am very happy to have Sally Apps from Cabot Learning Federation joining me. Sally, can you give us a wave that you are here and that you see yes and we
Hi.
can see
Yeah,
you?
I was here. My camera was
Hi.
just off, that's all.
Wonderful. Hello. I met Sally earlier this year to talk about this topic specifically, how Cabot Learning Federation is using feedback for strategic impact, how they are growing and adapting as a listening organization. And I have to say that I've gone back to our conversation a few times since then, just because a lot of things stuck with me from what Sally shared. One of the things was her depiction of how holistic the approach at Cabot has been. They've really worked with grit and determination to find a way that will work for them, that feedback will serve the highest purpose for their visions and their goals for the future as a trust. And the second thing was something that Sally mentioned at the very end of our conversation, which was, I think, a very humble depiction of her role as a trust leader. That yes, her role as a trust leader is powerful. It has a lot of strategic impact, but the core of her role is to empower the most important people in the children's eyes, which are the people working with children day to day to make sure that they are making the magic happen in a sense to make sure that we're unlocking all of that potential for the children in our care. And I think Cabot Learning Federation's journey becoming a listening organization and how they've changed their approaches is very representative of many trusts. And I think every listener here today may feel where they are in their journey. The trust had moments of high peaks of frequent surveying and that very data-driven use of feedback. Then they had a phase of stepping back and kind of really doing a reevaluation of what feedback means to them, doing a more qualitative feedback, building strong relationships as a foundation for feedback, and using that information to inform their decisions. And now I'd like to say they're finding a middle ground, because when we last spoke, Sally, you were just about to gear up for a new round of Adureo surveys across the trust, and I hope that you'll be able to speak a little bit to how that experience has been. And what I think this really shows, Sally, and to the listeners here today, is it's about putting in the work to find out what works, what's important for you as an organization within the context and where you are in your development journey, that really aligns with the culture that you're trying to build with the people that you're working with, and the vision that you have for an excellent education. So I'm very happy that Sally has agreed to join us to pick this up again and to share the story with the people here today. Welcome, Sally Apps, Trust Leader at Cabot Learning Federation. Please introduce yourself, introduce the trust, and maybe you can kind of sum up if I've misinterpreted anything from your story. Where do you think you are currently with your approach to stakeholder feedback?
Thank you so much. Very nice to meet you all, those of you that I haven't met before. We are a trust of now 36 schools, and that's around 18,000 children, and we operate in the Southwest. So the centre of our trust in terms of the geographical centre is Bristol. And we have schools that are in South Gloucestershire, and then to the south in North Somerset and Somerset, which are really big counties and really quite like. So the shape of our trust is that it kind of runs along the M5 really, and has this kind of urban city at its core, and then much more dispersed rural seaside town, like that holds a range of different kind of contexts. And so our learning as a trust, as we have been through a period of growth and development, we've been growing since we started in 2009, but in fairly steady ways. We had quite a big period of growth recently, and our learning has been about how to continue to be really place-based and at the same time be adding value as a trust, as a school improvement organisation in and of ourselves. So that's been really interesting for us, and I think our growth has shaped and changed us as it absolutely should. schools have come, generally speaking, in the schools in our trust, not all of them, but the vast majority have been from the position of being, say, a sponsored school. So a school that perhaps their school improvement journey wasn't going so well before they joined our trust. And that means that our school improvement approaches have been shaped by that. And I know that different trusts come together in different ways, and their schools' experiences and leaders' experiences are different. But it's definitely been the case over the course of the last few years that really understanding voice and how stakeholder voice can be very, very helpful to development as a trust, but also to development as an individual organisation within a trust. That journey has been really important to us. So that's a piece of work that I've led on behalf of the trust. As part of my work within our kind of strategy, it was though we had a sub-strategy until this year that was about voice. We won't have that sub-strategy next year. We feel that it has, in terms of a strategic priority, that has done its job. And so now that voice work should be part of, not business as usual, but it should be part of how we work. And so we'll keep developing it because it's definitely not finished. And we definitely have areas that we want to focus on. So student voice, our use of student voice will be part of a spotlight over the course of next year. But actually, this particular piece of work is something that was a strategic priority up to now and is now going to become part of our work and who we are. And that's characteristic of us as an organisation, that the things that we really focus on, once we feel we've got them to a state that we think that's good enough, and we now think we can grow that as part of our work, then we choose to do that and take it out of the kind of strategic focus. So the story you told about what we've done was very accurate. I'm quite happy to talk to it in more detail in terms of what actually we did. But yeah, no, there's nothing that you said that wasn't an accurate reflection. So thank you for listening to me so carefully as well. It hasn't always been entirely linear, my description of that journey. So if I take 2 minutes, just kind of overview of what we did. So we have done Ajurio surveys for some time. We do them every 2 years. We've done our third one most recently. But we found them really useful, but we've also wanted to have something that was more regular within the trust, that meant that we could review different elements within that time, but without necessarily it being an Ajurio survey. And one of the things that I did when I picked up the voice strategy as an area of strategic focus was to take the views, as you might expect, take the views of leaders about what works in their settings. And so we did a bit of an audit to say, what works for you? Staff voice, student voice, parent voice, kind of community voice, partner, like what works? Because I don't want to turn up and assume that I know what's going to work best. I want to hear about what works, and then I want to have a conversation with you, and we'll work out which things. In our trust, we talk about pillar and flame. The pillar are the things that we all do in exactly the same way, and they form a basis for then the flame of kind of local interpretation, of personal insight, of kind of flair and creativity and enjoyment to kind of make something your own. And so what do we put in our pillar? If I'm going to take anything to put in a pillar, I'm not going to assume that I would have the best view on what that would be. I would like to hear from other leaders who are leading across the organisation to tell me what works best. And whilst that was really helpful, it didn't actually lead me to the answer. It led me to some problems. And I wonder, actually, on reflection, if we would have always encountered those problems anyway. I think sometimes it's just part of the journey, isn't it? And you just have to walk through those things in that time to then get to what you feel is the kind of the best answer for you. But one of the approaches that was being used in one setting was that at the time we had an approach to belonging, and we surveyed all of our children as part of that approach to understand their perceptions of their own, the extent of their own belonging. And then we used some of the same, using the Carol Goodenough work, but we use some of the same questions in our staff survey. And what we ended up doing was saying, okay, we will ask the same questions on a regular basis at the same times across the trust and in the same way. The pillar of those questions will be 10 questions that ultimately link to staff perceptions of belonging using those kind of researched questions. And then you can have another 5 that are local to your setting, that are about things that you want to ask. Whether you want to go with the same thing over time or whether you want to change them according to the term that you're in is fine. We took that approach from a school for whom that had been working really well. It was a relatively new head teacher coming to the school to put in place this cycle of surveys. And the cycle went about the penultimate week of term, send the survey out. In the ultimate week, the last week of term, then share in briefing, these are the headlines, this is what came back. Go away for your break, come back. And the first staff meeting back, for a portion of that staff meeting, unpick those themes a bit more and have a longer discussion about them. And then in the 2 weeks later, in that SLT meeting, that's where you'll decide what we're going to do with that feedback, what's going to change, what's not, and then feed that back. And that was kind of a cycle. And then you would start again the next term. So we were always kind of garnering feedback on the same things at roughly the same point in the term. And it was clear this is affecting leadership, thought, decision, discussion, and this is what happens as a result. And so actually, in terms of a feedback loop, it felt like it was quite appropriate. It was, and the first kind of round of surveys, okay, this is helpful, interesting stuff, useful. Like, oh, we've not had this before at this level. We can definitely compare between schools. We can also see what is of a local concern, and is something that actually might tell us something we didn't already know that's quite useful. And I was quite pleased with it. So carried on, did it again. And over time, you can probably tell me this now listening, but I didn't see it myself. Over time, actually engagement dwindled. And it could have been for a number of reasons. It could have been that our leaders weren't following up in the ways that we had expected. It could have been that they were following the ways that we had kind of directed and expected, but that actually that it still wasn't doing it for the people that were filling in the surveys. It could have been kind of just general survey fatigue. There are a whole range of different reasons why that might have been the case. But I pushed it and I felt the failure of it. And I felt really embarrassed about it within the executive team because I was holding it. I work in a really effective executive team where people get things right a lot. And mine was going wrong and I could really feel it. And I had a brave moment, I think, with a trustee. So all of our strategic work, it has a trustee oversight. And I was speaking to my link trustee, who actually now is the chair of our board. And I didn't realise, I knew that she had some insight into it. I didn't realise actually she's a professor at the University of West of England. That is her area of specialism. So I went to her saying, I can't get these surveys to work. And I was completely schooled on how voice works. And it was brilliant. I had an absolutely brilliant hour with her, when she just asked me she listened well, and she asked me some really challenging questions. Things like, when you buy something and then you get a survey in your inbox, how often do you do that survey? I'm like, never. Why is that? Well, because I haven't got time. I'm not really interested. I don't know, make any difference to me. I've already bought the thing. And I realized, okay, yeah, I have become, inadvertently, in an effort to do something that would have some standardized element and that would allow us some insight at central level into local areas and local concerns. Actually, what I was doing was turning it into a really transactional thing, and it was quite consumer. And my consumers were telling me they're not really interested. And so it was challenging. And she suggested, through a course of conversation, she suggested, why don't you consider what are the areas where you really want to know what people think? And what are the different ways in which you might garner voice that are not about the transaction, where actually the work itself is part of the leadership follow-up? So how can you have small stakeholder focus groups, or how can you put something up for displaying a staff meeting with voting, or like a whole range of different things that are accessible and differently accessible to different groups? How will you make sure that actually that you've put the voices of those who most often are marginalised, who are statistically the least likely to engage with some of those more transactional bases? How will how your leaders use that opportunity to get alongside a particular staff group and say, I'm really keen to hear what you think of this particular area arena? And so we ended up doing a piece of training work with our principals, and a piece of and I shared with them some of my thoughts. And I said, you can still use for you, those surveys are working, you can still use them. But I want you to answer the question for me about what you've actually done, how you know that you have engaged with stakeholders who might not otherwise engage, what your leadership learning is, and what actually are the pressing concerns of what's coming through from those listening activities. And we then take those in it's not very finessed a system, but it's working for us. So it's an A4 sheet. It's a Word document with 4 areas. You type in as a principal what is going to work for you. So if you want to put how you garner or gather information, you do me a summary under those 4 headings. And then I just draw everything together under those 4 headings and start to look for patterns. Copilot's very helpful in this because it's the same 4 questions, the same 4 areas. Actually, it compares really well. And we can start to then say, so, okay, whilst these are summarized at local level, what which of these concerns are things that are concerns for particular marginalised groups, so that would overlay and then say, well, typically marginalised groups of this nature encounter these kinds of issues. So where you are seeing this in your feedback, you might actually find that those are areas that you might want to follow up and deepen. And so it's really, it's the leadership activity of going out and having those conversations, either one-to-one or small group, or and telling people what you're thinking about as a leader and asking them what their experience is like as a member of valued member of staff, and then bringing those back and sharing them back out. That whole process has enabled us to be better connected, I think, as leaders. Definitely haven't solved all of our issues as a trust. We definitely haven't, like, it's not the answer to everything, but actually it has really enabled us to better understand, I suppose, the ecosystems of our schools better. And really it's about recognizing that it's about the leaders in their schools and what they're doing with their communities, and me just knowing that and learning from that where I can, trying to find ways to touch their concerns with our strategy so that we can better serve them. And um, it's been transformational for us in terms of our understanding of our own organisation. I cannot give our trustees numbers in the same way as I can for the Duro survey. So we still do the survey and we still have those kind of those metrics. But actually, once that we start to put on to strategic plans, what our KPIs are going to be, quite often the metrics that link to voice are about voice tells us this and it's a particular thing. And then I will find the quantitative basis for all of that, and I can absolutely do that. But I'm not interested in whether 80% of people tick a box. I'm interested in whether what we know of our colleagues and from our conversations, whether or not they feel this way. And that's quite a different way, I think, of engaging with voice. I said 2 minutes. I did loads of minutes. I'm so sorry.
That is okay. I just want to bring everyone's attention. In the chat, we just shared the spotlight that we had with Sally, where she has shared this template that you can take a look at of the 4 areas that her leaders use to fill in for.
If anyone is taken with it, wants to use it and then do something better, feel free to do that, but also then to share it back, because I don't consider this is the best piece of work that I've ever done, but it is working. And I think that's the thing. I was doing something that was really complex. I was doing loads of work. I was working hard in the background. I was sweating it to, to get that information, but actually it wasn't doing the job. This is much less of me doing that, but it's doing the job. So if anyone can find a way to make it better, I'm all about that.
One thing that I want to kind of hone in on is something that you've said about this listening being a leadership skill, and that you had to train your leaders to start doing this and to adapt this approach. I think in today's society, leadership is about taking up space. It's about being commanding. It's about always having an answer, filling in the blanks. But listening is the opposite. It's about not taking up, but making space, about giving space to others. So how did you help your leaders to develop this skill to sit with your stakeholders and really listen?
I think that's still a work in progress. So I think this method really helps that, because one thing that we did insist was that this was head teachers that did it. And this was not something that could be devolved. The approaches could also be used by other leaders. And if they were valuable, then of course, get your head of English to do that with their English department, and to have, to emulate some of those ways of garnering voice. But it was clear for me that for our purposes, I wanted to know from the head teachers what they had done to engage with all of the colleagues across their school, and perhaps particularly colleagues that they wouldn't have usually come into contact with very much. I think what my own experience as a head was, there would be certain people that become kind of bellwethers for me, and they wouldn't necessarily be the obvious people who had influence beyond their title, or people for whom they held something of that. And I think when you're as a leader, you tend to have, well, I am anyway, I imagine others on the call, be a bit of an intuit about where the kind of real power lies in your school, and it's not always with you. And I think really understanding those people, their perspectives, and developing relationships of trust with those people, so that they will tell you when something is not right, or when there's a concern that they can't quite put their own finger on. They're people who can be part of your kind of broader heat map of leading the school and leading a variety of different people with different perspectives. And I think that that's something that when I was a head teacher, I I was encouraged through coaching, and I found it was also a natural kind of area of interest for me to be thinking, why does this person who is the science technician, why do they need to know this thing that's in my email that I'm sending out to all staff? I quite often was like, why would they need to know that? What is it they do need to know? How does is this relevant to them in their role, so that I'm not just filling their inbox with chat? And at the same time, why wouldn't they need to know? Because this is their school and their community. And so trying to always think about my communication from that in that way, and having people for whom um, it was important that I walked down the corridor and sometimes into the science prep room and said, "How are things? What do you think? Like, what's going on at the moment? What should I be worrying about? I'm worrying about this. Should I be? Have I got it wrong? Have I missed something?" And they were people who would share that with me. They didn't have anything to, they had a lot to give and nothing to lose, honestly. And I was able to get insights from them that I wouldn't have got any other way, which was really good for me and my leadership. I think I'm much more mature now. I think I would do it differently. I'd love to go back and do that headship again with what I've learned. I might not be as good, honestly, but I like to think that I've learned a lot since. Um, I think that our different leaders have different strengths, and for some of them, that way of thinking is very natural. They're better at it than I would ever been, and with that additional support and kind of framework, they have really flown. For other leaders, this is not an easy territory, and I think for all of us, even if you've sought the feedback, it can be quite bracing if it's not what you wanted to hear. And quite often, people are pointing to the things that you know are issues because you're working on them too, and they're keeping you up at night as well. And so sometimes to hear it back in stereo, that can be quite overwhelming. And I think trying to help people into the space where you can say, it's okay that people say these things. Sometimes people say spiteful things. Sometimes they do, and that's up to them, really. And you have to be able to wear it because that is unfortunately part of the role. Sometimes people say spiteful things or things that are a bit ungenerous, but actually underneath it is still telling you something about a culture or about a piece of work. Sometimes they say things that are difficult but bracing, but they are absolutely the thing you needed to hear at this time. And often they say things that are really encouraging about what they've seen or what their experiences. And I think being able to help people to contextualize things and to recognize all voices come from somewhere. There's no such thing as an apolitical voice. Everybody, like every thought, everything you articulate has some politic behind it, some description, and has experience behind it. And what I say today might be different to what I say tomorrow, it might be different to what I said yesterday. And that's okay too. These are moments in time, but they are real interactions, they're authentic interactions, they're connections, and actually that connectedness is what we all seek ultimately. And that actually there is, even in the moments people are giving you some feedback that might be a bit itchy, actually it's building something for the future for you in terms of trust. I think having to encouraging people into that space, so it's not just, oh, I'm gonna have to type this to Sally and tell her that they're all struggling with, I don't know, flexible working arrangements. And I've had really difficulty with it as well myself. I understand that. This is not about me checking up on you. It's about me understanding that that's an issue, because maybe there's something as a trust that we can do that would support that, or at least be alert to that. And often the thing that I think people have found really, really helpful is that often the listening is the work. Like actually the conversation, actually the fact that I came to you and asked you about this thing and you had the chance to tell me, it means that you've actually gone away with that feeling like it was, if not resolved, it's been held, and that was enough. Because some of the things people are bringing aren't things that are in our gift to be able to shift and change. And that's difficult too. But us marking that together and me saying, you brought me several things. This is the one that I think we can do something about straight away. And that's what I'm going to do. This is the one that I understand what you're saying. I think there's a bit more complexity to it. I'd really like to spend some time talking about it. And I'm going to mark out some time. It's not for the 2 months, because that's where in the diary we've got a real good chance to kind of get that one out on the open road. And I'm going to put that there. This one here, I just need to explain to you that is something I cannot change. It's until, a national policy changes, or until we're in this different position, this is always going to be a thing. So I think we need to accept that. And I'm not going to come back to it, at least not soon, because these other things are things that we can change. And so actually you're almost helping people to manage their own mental health, their own well-being, in terms of like, do worry about this here. This you should, like, you hold me to account on, I should be getting this sorted out for you. And this thing over here, it's not to say don't worry, it's to say maybe we're all worried, and maybe it's not something that's going to get better, but at least we all know that. And I think that sometimes to dignify people with the truth and to be honest about things is actually in and of itself the work. And I think sometimes as leaders we forget to do that. and we look for solutions when in fact holding space is the solution. Actually holding, like, you can't be done about everything. You can't turn up to everything and say, I can't change it, sorry, I'm glad I listened. Like, you have to be able to do something about people's concerns. But there are things for whom, and for those things, they are where you hold the space and say, I'm afraid this is a difficult thing I'm holding to. There is some kind of shared humanity and vulnerability in that, and I think that's really valuable.
Oh, and I think by finding that and doing the work, like you say, listening is the work. You're improving other things. You're increasing that psychological safety, that authentic element of it. That people, when they give their voice, they also know that they will be heard and that it will be taken into account and that there's someone listening. I think that's very, very powerful.
And there's some quite robust stuff that we do as an organisation. Sorry, because you're probably about to say something else. But we take that voice, and that our board know what the voice is. And when we're
Yeah.
doing
So my
right
question
now,
is
oh, go on.
about how do you use that for trust strategy? How are you kind of, now that you've made that strong foundation, made that core listening as a leadership responsibility and skill? How are you using that and spreading that information that it's getting to the right people at the right times for that strategic decision making to happen?
So I have a board link that I share that with anyway. So she wanted to, as you might imagine, when it came to the jury survey, she wanted to go right that through that with me and look at a whole range of different kind of metrics and markers. But that's because she has also has expertise in voice, and she is monitoring that particular strategy. So she's been part of that work all the way through. So there's kind of ongoing conversation with her as a board, as a trustee. And then when it comes to, we're right now in kind of strategic planning territory with our board and getting sign off. It's actually signed off for this year, and we're just kind of filling in the final parts now, and looking at things like KPIs. And so I am the irritating person when it comes to KPIs who's saying, I don't think you can just put 80% say this. Like, I don't think it's a survey outcome. It might be that in 2 years in the Aduro survey, when we come back to it, this marker has moved to here. You can put that in, but this is a year plan, and in the year's plan, you need to be able to feed back on voice, and I need to know that you didn't undermine our voice work because you wanted an outcome for a board paper. So we need to weave that into our kind of wider voice work. So I'm a bit of an irritant for the rest of our team on that, but I'm doing it because I'm holding true to things that we all agreed on. It's just, it can be convenient at times. I am also, I suppose, within our trust, within our executive team kind of strategy work, and then when we take it to board, I have positioned myself so that people are necessarily saying, and how does this link with what our stakeholders are telling us? So that, and it has shaped what is in strategy. It has, some of the things that we are doing, we're doing directly because the voice work that we've done has told us that a particular group, a targeted group that we might have chosen to work with, are still not having the experience of work that we want them to have, because either we haven't listened hard enough, or we have not been understood how to break down those barriers well enough yet. So we continue, or we reshape, and we need to make those people bring them right to the core of the shape of the strategy, not just the kind of the markers at the end of it. And so there's a kind of an element of co-construction. You have to be quite careful, particularly with marginalised groups, particularly about inadvertently making the work their work. So for example, development of leaders from global majority backgrounds, that's something that we have committed to as a trust, and it is really broad ranging, deep work, and it involves a lot of reflection and challenge and a lot of difficult moments. And you really want those people that already have those roles, or that are people who will potentially fulfill those roles, to be part of that. But you have to be able to do that in a way that is consultative and authentic and co-constructive, without saying, well, you tell me what we should do. This is your work now. It's not your work, it's my work. But I can't do it without understanding your experience. And that's I think that's really shaped some of, not all of, but some of the strands of our strategy.
Thank you. We are at time, but I do want to allow you to give any final remarks, any final words of advice for anyone listening that would like to do listening more authentically and deeply as an organization.
I think for me, this may not be the same for you, but for me, the critical point was admitting that it wasn't going well. and saying, I need some help because I'm driving this thing, I'm holding it for the trust and I feel like it's not getting there. And I think that moment of vulnerability was the key to the ultimate success. And I think I could have doubled down, worked harder, gone again, and I might have edged up some of the numbers, and I would have still missed the point that the people that weren't doing it were some of the people I needed to hear from most because it wasn't the right format. So I think if you're in a similar position where you're thinking, why haven't we got the engagement? Thinking about what the engagement looks like and what you would engage with, if you were not in your role, if you were somewhere else doing something different, or if you had a different set of life circumstances or experiences. I think thinking about it from that perspective has been for us the key. It is like we have really not finished this work. This is still work very much in progress, but it is something I feel really proud of now. Whereas if you had asked me about our voice work 2 years ago, I wouldn't have known what to say. Honestly, I'd have found that really difficult.